actually good interaction, and a lot of people in that estate or estates like it have faith in the guards. I think we need to look back to Limerick and the resources that were flung at Limerick when all this crime absolutely exploded, as you were saying, and the money went in, the resources went in. They need really, Justice Shatter, or Minister Shatter, needs to really rethink the whole thing, and they need to put a lot of more resources into that to tackle it.
I think there's a couple of issues. First of all, as Michael was saying there, because we're increasingly seeing the use of kind of small weapons, relatively small weapons, they're much easier to conceal just at a basic level. So I think that creates another challenge for the guards. But the thing that I think, in a sense, has delivered in terms of falling crime rates in Limerick was that the initiatives around kind of early child intervention and juvenile justice and stuff that was aimed at kids was linked to the criminal justice responses. So the guards and the broader kind of social regeneration, as it was called, was linked up together. And, you know, there's been controversy about the way in which money was spent, but nevertheless it has delivered in terms of falling crime rates. If we look at West Dublin, there has actually been a lot of money spent as well on early childhood interventions and projects. But maybe because of the spatial arrangements of West Dublin, I don't know if there's been the same linkage in terms of the criminal justice responses, and that may be an area to look at.
Well, maybe, Michael, if we just try and put it into perspective, as I understand it, murders are down, but gun crime statistically is up. But
no, gun crime is down.
It's down, is it?
Yeah, last year, 16 people were killed in gun homicides. Now, they weren't all gangland. We've had 4 this year. One of them was not gangland, it was a horrible murder-suicide in the country. But in 2010 there were 23, so we saw in 2011 a 40% reduction in gun homicide, but that's no comfort to anybody. There are probably, I'd say probably about another 15 people alive tonight who by the end of this year will be dead. Statistically, we're probably talking about 18, 19 people are going to be murdered by guns this year. So statistics are fine, but you know, we're talking about human tragedies, and whether it's 19 people killed or 25 people killed or 14 people killed, it's still a difficult job for Gardaí. But just getting back to the point about policing, 2 major areas for Gardaí in relation to gun crime were Finglas in North Dublin and Limerick. And in both those areas there was a significant addition of resources, and there were startling results. For example, in Finglas in the year 2011 there wasn't 1 gun murder. Previously you were talking about 4 or 5 gun murders a year. So there was a detective inspector appointed for Finglas, there were extra detectives
appointed. But is that just containment as opposed to, you know, finding a long-term solution to the problem? You flood an area with Gardaí, it solves the problem, but it's not a long-term solution.
No, and Gardaí will say by the time the Gardaí are called, it's too late. That they have to answer all the ills of society, so it's prevention. But Gardaí are called, it's far too late, because they're the firefighters.
Alan, in the short term, having kind of more intensive policing presence, it does reassure local residents, and it creates respite in a scenario where you have communities which are under extreme pressure. So even in that sense, even if it's only containment, if you're living in the middle of this, containment, you could be very grateful for it.
But Alan, I mean, if you take it, there's 1 Gardaí station in Tallinn, there's 4 in Limerick, you know, that's resources that you're talking about. Tala has a population of in excess of 100,000 people. That's not Limerick, you know, it's similar, but they have 4 Garda stations, so the resources are just multiplied.
Okay, well, coming up on this news special, we're going to look at the human cost of gun crime and the thorny issue of gun control. Welcome back to this TV3 news special on gun crime. Behind every crime statistic is a real person who has had to pay a terrible price. One innocent victim of gun crime is Maxine Sutcliffe. His partner, John O'Neill, was shot dead for no apparent reason.
I wasn't in the bar that night. I was at home with the babies, and John went out at 11:10, 11:15, to meet a couple of the boys that were there from the wedding, and he went, and everything was fine. He kissed us goodbye. I waved out the window at him. He said, "Make sure you lock that window, because I don't want anyone to get those babies." And then it was about, I can't even remember what time it was. I think it was about 3:30. It wasn't long after anyway. My sister Olive rang my phone, and I woke up. I didn't know, you know, it was late. It was dark. She said, "There's been an accident, you need to go to Coco's bar." And I said, "What, an accident?" She said, "John's been shot." And I said, "I think I actually cursed at her." I said, "No way." She said, yeah, she said, you need to go, hurry. And I just, at that moment, I just panicked. We got into a taxi, and when I pulled, it felt like forever before the taxi got there, but it was only a matter of minutes. And when we pulled up from the taxi, I could just see an ambulance, and I thought, why is the ambulance still here? He needs to go to hospital. He's been shot, and he needs to go. And I was running to go into Coco's bar because I needed to get to him, but she said, he's not in there. And I said, where is he? I need to go to him. And she said, he's up there. And I looked, and he's on the ground under a sheet. And I said to the police, I need to go to him. I need to just hold his hand. And they couldn't understand what I was saying, but they just kept saying no. And they kept saying momentum, momentum. And I thought, well, okay, they're going to let me. So I sat on the pavement and I watched, and I could just see his arm. His arm was out like this. And then the guys came with the forensics, I think, in the white suits. And then when I saw them, I knew it was bad. And Sharon said, no, he's dead. I said, no, he's not dead. I need to hold his hand. You know, I need to be there. And he needs me to hold his hand. She said, no, he is. And then I don't know what happened at all. Just went in a blur, and the police came and said, we're taking him. And I said, but you told me I could be with him, and I need to hold his hand. I need to tell him I love him. I need to just hold his hand. And they said, no, he's going to go to the palace, and he's going to be taken there, and you can go there in the morning. And I couldn't understand what had just happened, you know. But then that was it. Then in the meantime, I just had to wait, and every day I was told, no, you can't see him today. Over a week later, it was 9 days actually. He was in a chapel arrest, and they told, when we got there, he was laid out, but it just didn't look like him. It didn't look like John at all. He looked completely different, not like. And I know I've seen people who are dead, so, but he just didn't look. He looked like he was really hungry or something. And then they told us that he was going to go on the next flight, the next morning. He was going home. And I was just so glad to think that we were going home, that we were getting out of there, because I couldn't stay there another minute, you know. I just needed to go. And then I saw him, when we came home, I went to see him in Jennings, and he looked completely different. He looked like the man that we knew. But it was just, I can't describe it. I can't describe the horror. It was a living nightmare, that's all I can say. It was a living nightmare. When I had to tell Jake that he wanted to know where he was, and I thought, how am I going to tell him? I don't want to break his heart. Why do I have to do it? Why did this have to happen? I said, but I'm sorry, son, he's not coming back. What do you mean, he's not coming back? I said, he's dead, baby. He's dead, and he's not coming back. And then that was when I realised, when I had to say the words to Jake, that I knew. And I wanted to just die myself, and I know that's a terrible thing to say when you have two young babies, but it was just, I was turmoil, I was thrown into, it was hell. Jake talks about him all the time, every day. He showed me how to use this tool, or, you know, and it was something that he had done. He remembers things all the time. I gave him a Valentine's card yesterday, and I always put, for Mum and Dad, I always put our names on it. And he said, do you know what, that's the nicest card I ever got in my life. And he just looked up to the ceiling and said, thanks, Dad. And that just broke my heart all over again. Why did they have to go through this? Why? I just can't understand it.
It's Maxine Sutcliffe, who I spoke to earlier today. His partner John was shot for no apparent reason in Spain some years ago. And Michael, what struck me about that interview was the tragedy, the utter desperation, the senseless loss of life, and the ripple effect that a death like that has, not just on the immediate family, but it permeates all the way out. And it's an all too familiar story that you're familiar with.
For my sins, I've spoken to hundreds of people like Maxine, hundreds of mothers, hundreds of fathers, hundreds of widows, and it always strikes me that there's a moment when they realise that their loved one is dead, obviously like Maxine did when she saw him under the sheet. But that moment never goes away. That is their life for the rest of their lives. They never get over it. It's something that is with them when they wake up, and it's something that is with them when they go to bed. It's the ultimate shock because it's so sudden, they don't get a chance to say goodbye, and it's just with them forever.
Does it not as well, Niamh, have some sort of a galvanising effect on the community? And we saw that in the case of Roy Collins, his father Steve, who took to the streets of Limerick, and people in their thousands came out and marched against these criminals, these gun-toting criminals. It also has that effect as well.
It was something that did emerge, particularly in terms of Roy Collins and Shane Gagan, actually. Both cases, the families in different ways made very strident efforts to come out and say, this is not us, this is not what we're about, and this is not what Limerick is about, and this is not what people in Limerick are about. And one of the best things, actually, in some ways, is that in some cases, particularly I think in the Shane Gagan case, that was in many ways kind of somebody who was outside the disadvantaged communities, experiencing something that actually was very familiar to people who lived in the disadvantaged communities. And I think it created a space for a lot of other people to say, you know, I lost my son too. And it actually kind of revealed in some ways the extent of the loss and the hurt. And it was a powerful moment in kind of uniting Limerick people. I saw John Gilligan there at the beginning of the programme saying, you know, this is not what we're about. That's an important moment for communities, and really community is the key source of responding to this for people who are living. Solidarity, uniting together, you know, people coming together and saying, we're not going to allow our children to be sucked into that. That's an absolutely critical part of any response to gun crime and all the range of crimes that we're looking at here, which are part of this, the drugs issue.
Or would you get the sense that perhaps the public in general are somewhat immune to gun crime, to death, to murder, that it takes so much more to shock them upright into saying, you know, this is not right, we now need to take some sort of concerted action. And I know the last time I saw that happening in this country was the murder of Veronica Guerin, and I haven't seen anything since then, but yet the crimes have just been appalling.
Yeah, I think particularly Melanie's death last week has raised consciousness in people, but I think prior to that it's seen as just somebody else out of the way, somebody else that's not going to cause problems in this country. Probably they're drug-fueled gangs. There's actually no excuse for them, you know, kind of. But this is Melanie's one in the community, anyhow, that I was in today, walking around. It certainly resonated. They're very, very depressed.
But did it resonate beyond the community? Because unless that happens, it's just another statistic.
Yeah, I'm not sure about beyond the community. I know in Tallaght itself it has resonated in people, and going about my daily business, people have said to me about poor Melanie, 16 years of old, female. She's now, you know, been brutally shot dead. I don't know how much it impacts on the rest of the country. I'm not sure about that, whether people have that concern or they're just, given the state of this country, they're really preoccupied with everything else, and the loss of one girl in Tallaght maybe just doesn't seem too significant to them at the moment.
I'm slightly cynical about this. I've covered plenty of turning points. I'll give you 3 names: Donna Cleary, Bibas Salite, and Anthony Campbell. And like Melanie, they were all innocent people in the wrong place at the wrong time, like Shane Gagan. And I thought every one of those murders would be a turning point. There aren't any turning points. In a year's time we'll be sitting here talking about another innocent person killed, because people involved in gang crime don't care.
I don't know, actually, Michael, because I think Gavin and Millie in Limerick was a turning point. I think that definitely was. But the other thing I think, and it's very complex for people who are living in the communities, and obviously the full investigation into the Melanie McCarthy-McNamara murder has to happen yet, but in context where, you know, a feud exists, that creates a very complex dynamic in terms of violence and in terms of gun crime and in terms of patterns of tit for tat and retaliation, and that's a very special policing challenge. And I think that in a sense, once people feel that a particular act is part of a feud, they kind of say, well, that's just that problem and it's not normal in society. But feuding can have a very damaging effect on a whole community.
Okay, well, looking at the turning points, as you said, Michael, perhaps we then need to change the focus of the debate and not look at what has happened at the back end of it, but perhaps focus attention on why it begins, how it begins, and what we need to do in order to root out that cancer. Do you not think, Niamh?
Well, I think we do. I mean, in a sense, it's a dual-pronged approach. Like there's a policing challenge as well on early childhood interventions and projects, But maybe because of the spatial arrangements of West Dublin, I don't know if there's been the same linkage in terms of the criminal justice responses, and that may be an area to look at.
Well, maybe, Michael, if we just try and put it into perspective, as I understand it, murders are
linked to the criminal justice responses. So the guards and the broader kind of social regeneration, as it was called, was linked up together. And there's been controversy about the way in which money was spent, but nevertheless it has delivered in terms of falling crime rates. If we look at West Dublin, there has actually been a lot of money spent.
Actually good interaction, and a lot of people in that estate or estates like it have faith in the guards. I think we need to look back to Limerick and the resources that were flung at Limerick when all this crime absolutely exploded, as you were saying, and the money went in, the resources went in. They need really, Justice Shatter, or Minister Shatter, needs to really rethink the whole thing, and they need to put a lot of more resources into that to tackle it.
I think there's a couple of issues. First of all, as Michael was saying there, because we're increasingly seeing the use of kind of small weapons, relatively small weapons, they're much easier to conceal, just at a basic level. So I think that creates another challenge for the guards. But the thing that I think, in a sense, has delivered in terms of falling crime rates in Limerick was that the initiatives around kind of early child intervention and juvenile justice and stuff that was aimed at kids was